I will tell you, was actually the most difficult prep I've ever done for an interview, because there's so many things that we could talk with you about
Mm.
that it would take, hours and hours. But um, one thing that I think we'd love to start with is your experience of being a West Virginian. And I know that's probably a very broad topic, but to give a little bit of context, John and I are both from Parkersburg,
Oh,
and
great.
he still lives there. I moved away, I don't know, probably over 10 years ago. Still have a lot of family there. But I always like asking people who are from West Virginia that moved out what that experience was like for them, because for me, it was a little complex. I never really appreciated where I was from until I left. And if I recall correctly, you moved away when you went to MIT. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. I'm kind of curious what that experience was like for you, growing up in West Virginia and then leaving.
Yeah, I mean, West Virginia was just all I knew for a very long time. All of my family's from West Virginia. All of my extended family from West Virginia, grandparents, great grandparents. Like we were, all West Virginians through and through. My mom worked for the university at the football office. And so leaving the state was very scary, just because that was my comfort blanket, being near by anybody who I could ever need ever. And so I think leaving also gave me perspective of like what was unique about West Virginia, because when I went somewhere, I would often be the first West Virginian that people would meet. And I was always very surprised by that. And they would
Yep.
ask me what it was like growing up in West Virginia. And that was like the first time that I had to be a little bit more introspective of like, what was it like growing up in West Virginia? And how is it unique than how you grew up? So it was definitely, I think, eye-opening that my like growing up experience was more unique than some of my peers.
Yeah, for sure. I'm glad that you mentioned that, because that's something that I have certainly felt, and I know a lot of people I've talked to who have also moved away from the state have felt as well. Just this, like, not really having to reflect on it until you actually leave, and people kind of view you as this anomaly, because West Virginians don't. I mean, I don't know. My experience is a little different because I moved to Michigan, but most people I'd met there had never met a West Virginian in their life, which to me was mind blowing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it was the same experience for me. Trying to tell people what a pepperoni roll is always interesting, because I'm like, that is such a the pepperoni roll is a crucial part of my identity. And how do you not understand how unique this is? And why does it sound so boring to you when it is absolutely revolutionary?
That's a good point. Well, we feel the same way. So obviously, you talked a little bit about being from West Virginia, something that I'm always interested in, because there's a reoccurring theme that when we talk to our listeners, they kind of feel like sometimes they have to hide their Appalachian or West Virginia roots, right, in order to advance their career. Did you ever feel like that, or did you always kind of wear West Virginia on your sleeve?
I think for me, it's been a little different because I never had that Southern West Virginian accent that,
Mhm.
comes along with its own stereotypes. And for me, being part of West Virginia, being from West Virginia, I think gave me a unique perspective in my industry. And so that was always something that I leaned into, not away from. So for me, I think it's always held an advantage because I meet other science communicators who want to talk about climate change to a broad audience, and they come from these bubbles where everybody already agrees with scientists. And so I think learning from somebody who comes from a region where that is not the case, there's a lot to learn from that. And so I think people are really interested in that perspective.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, Appalachians in general are really an underrepresented socioeconomic minority in a lot of ways in different places. And I'm glad that you mentioned science communicator, because that was what I was going to get into next. I think that this is something that's such a cool part about your profession and what you do. And so I'd love for you to, if you don't mind, kind of explaining what it means to be a science communicator, because I think that's really interesting and really unique.
Yeah. So for me, my job is many different things, but it all involves telling people about science and trying to make science more accessible and welcoming to more people. And I do that across many different platforms. So I have books, mostly children's books. I have different science TV shows, both for kids and adults. I do a lot of public speaking. And I do a lot of science communication on social media, so on TikTok and Instagram and Twitter. And so when a big science news event happens, I take it upon myself to try to take everything that's happening in the news and try to translate it in a way that everybody can feel like they understand it without having a science background.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's an important point of that too, because there's a lot of people who are really good science communicators to other scientists. I've worked with some of them. I used to be in policy advocacy for a while on flood insurance and water infrastructure, which are not sexy topics, but they're very highly technical and they're really important. And it was really hard to find somebody who could both have the knowledge of that and effectively communicate it to lawmakers who may or may not be interested. But I'm glad that you mentioned sort of the platforms that you use, because that's something that I noticed about you, like following you and with a lot of what you put out, like on TikTok or something like that, which is I've noticed that you're really effective at using your platform and expertise to push back against things like disinformation or things that are just patently false. I'm wondering if you could speak to that, and is that something that you kind of feel as a role that you're adapting, being someone who has those platforms, but also that expertise, or is that a problem that you're noticing a lot where there is a lot of disinformation?
Yeah, there definitely can be. And I think because social media is so accessible now, everybody has access to so much information. It is easy. Well, it's hard to kind of filter out what information is trustworthy and what information isn't. For example, one of the biggest news headlines recently in my industry, in the space industry, was that rocket that was falling to Earth that was launched by China. And there was a lot of misinformation because when you have an event like this, it sounds really scary. And so you have these clickbaity headlines that are designed to scare you, even though there is no chance of it hitting you or anyone you know. And so when I see an event like that, that does sound really scary, I like to come in and be like, you know what? I get it. It does sound scary. Let's talk about the probability of it actually hitting you or anybody you know. And I try to calm people's fears and give a little nuance to the situation, because with so many of these things, it's easier to imagine this very simplified explanation that is wrong. And so sometimes I try to make a more complex information, complex description of what's happening that is a little bit more nuanced but is accurate.
That's obviously really incredible work. That's stuff that obviously we need more of, especially in today's society. So let's kind of transfer over to Netflix and what you got going on there. Something that you've kind of hit on, or at least really well, is getting younger audience members to kind of come into the STEM side of things. And part of that is getting girls interested in STEM. Uh, Are you seeing, more young girls come into STEM? Do you think these things are working?
I mean, I'd love to see some more recent numbers. It's hard to know, to be quite honest, because it takes a while to get that data in. And so the work that we're doing now, it's going to be hard to know whether it was effective until like 5 or 10 years from now.
Mm-hmm.
However, personally, anecdotally, what I see is with my show on Netflix, I am a female science presenter on a platform like Netflix doing science experiments. And I think to people in my world and sort of the TV world, they don't really realize that that is something that's entirely unique. That was just, I think, a cool show that they were like, yeah, let's go ahead and pick up this one. But in the world of science television, that is groundbreaking. I was 9 months pregnant doing science experiments on the largest streaming platform in the world, and I had it was so cool. And I had comments and messages from families all over the world that were like, my kids have never seen anything like this. My boys are now drawing pictures of female scientists. My girls say that they now want to grow up to be a scientist and a mom, because before they didn't think they could be both. And on Halloween, there were dozens of girls across the country that dressed up as me. Some of them even like added a pillow to their stomach to be pregnant because they wanted to be a scientist for Halloween. And I'm like, this is the dream, to create something like this that feels like it's having real impact because of the representation that it filled, this gap in representation that it filled. That it was just really, really cool to see.
Yeah, that's got to be so rewarding.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's the good stuff. I'm like, and I don't think I realized that it was going to have quite that impact. I've been doing stuff like this for a while, but just not directly for little kids. And then when I did this one, I was like, oh, I want to do more of this. This feels good. It feels really, really nice to get those messages. So yeah, it was pretty cool.
I realized I asked you that question and it didn't even tell our listeners the show or anything like that. So it's Emily's Wonderlab. Can you just tell our listeners maybe a little bit about what you do on the show?
Yes. So Emily's Wonderlab is a show for preschool age and up, and it's a science show where in each episode I do one larger than life science experiment where I make something explode, or we make a pool of slime, or we create like a huge pool of something called oobleck where kids have to walk across without sinking, and just something that's really wonderful and brings science to life. And then at the end of each episode, I do an at-home science experiment using materials that you probably already have around your kitchen and around your house, so that people watching the show can bring all of the science that we're doing into their own homes.
Yeah, someone that you obviously remind me of is Bill Nye. Like growing up, with Bill Nye. So talking about younger generations, that's somebody that I can always, like, if you say science, like it's Bill Nye, the science guy. And I saw that you were or are a correspondent on his show. So this is really just a selfish question, and I know that there's going to be a lot of people who want to know this. What is it like to work with Bill Nye, the science guy?
Oh, it's so good. I mean, he is the best. I remember so this is actually brings West Virginia into the mix. So I remember interviewing for that position, and I assumed that I would be interviewing with someone at Netflix or someone with the production company. But no, I interviewed with Bill Nye. And so
Wow.
I the day that I was interviewing, I was a nervous wreck. I had like a stomach ulcer, and I was like speed reading through all his books because I thought that he might ask me a question about one of the books that he's written. And I was so nervous, but it ended up going incredibly well because I told him I was from West Virginia, and he had just given a talk somewhere in West Virginia. I think Wheeling, I forgot, and I'm blanking on this, where he was giving a talk, but he was giving a talk in West Virginia. And we talked about how West Virginia's relationship with coal kind of influenced a lot of the state's feelings toward climate change and environmental policies. And I think I helped give a little bit of context to why the situation is so dire there, and all of the help that West Virginians need so that they can have the liberty and bandwidth to even think about climate change. And I think that is what landed me the job. And so it went really well. And he's exactly as you would imagine, kind of like a nerdy family member who just always wants to talk about science. I remember when in the writing room for Bill Nye Saves the World on Netflix, that's the show that I am a correspondent for him on. There was one time where we were going over what we wanted to talk about in the show, and he brings this science experiment like out of his pocket, because Bill Nye carries science experiments with him, apparently, of course. And he was like, oh, yes, well, this reminds me of this science experiment. And I think he made a cloud in a bottle or something like that. And he was doing it and he was explaining it. And then after a while, the showrunner was like, Bill, we are never going to leave this room if you keep on talking about science. So we're going to need you to lock it up so we can finish this episode. But yeah, he's exactly as you would imagine he would be.
That's good to hear.
That's so cool. That was, I mean, when you think about it, dialing back to science communication as a whole, that was our generation's, I don't want to say only, major figure, but really the one that everybody remembers.
Yeah.
And so looking at what you're doing now, I think it's pretty clear that you can be the next generation sort of Bill Nye of that world and be able to communicate like that, which is just a really, really cool mantle to have.
And you know, the beautiful thing is because social media is what it is today, I think that there is room for thousands of Bill Nyes because no one person should be an expert in all things. We need to have a Bill Nye of climate change, of vaccines, of genetically modified foods, of all of these different areas of space, you know, of different things, because it's hard to have that much knowledge in one particular topic. Yeah. And beyond that, if we're trying to reach a diverse group of people, we need people with diverse backgrounds who, you know, have different communication styles to reach the type of audience that we're hoping to influence. And so we need so many different people to be the next Bill Nyes.
Absolutely. Completely agree. Well, and on that subject, I have one more question that revolves around your work with Netflix and everything. And then I want to kind of get into some quick hits on some fun questions. I saw that you had the opportunity to work with Cardi B. Really would love to know how that came about and what that experience was like for you, because it looked really cool.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That was so cool. I got the call on something like a Wednesday and they asked if I was available on a Saturday. And I was like, I will drive to the ends of the earth to go do science with Cardi B. And I didn't know much about what it was. I was just told that it was this new show that she was doing where she's going to try new things. And one of the things that she was trying is she wanted to teach science to preschool kids. And so they brought me in. And the funny thing is that I had no time to prepare because the place where they wanted me to do science was right behind the area that they were filming during the day. Mm-hmm. And so I was going to be in their line of sight. And so they were like, you're going to have about 4 minutes to set up your science experiment before we bring in Cardi B. And I was like, 4 minutes? Like I have chemicals and I have to measure them properly. And we're going to be mixing them together with Cardi. And I do not want to be the person that's known as the person that blew up Cardi B. And so I have my 4 minutes and I'm furiously measuring things and pouring things and weighing things and trying to make sure that everything is exactly as it should be. And then she walks in and she's exactly as you would imagine, just this like beautiful presence of like, she doesn't look like a real human. Like your skin is too perfect. Your hair is too nice. Your makeup is too glamorous. Like you look so perfect. And so I was absolutely starstruck, but the best possible thing happened. So I had all the science ready. And then we had the preschool kids set up in front of us because they were basically our live audience watching us. And when Cardi comes out, all the kids who have just sat down, they look up and see who's here. And instead of talking to Cardi, they go, Emily, I watch your show.
That is so cool. And that's so cool.
I kid you not, Cardi looks at me kind of like, who are you? And I was like, I have a kid show. I have a kid show. And I was like, obviously a 4-year-old is going to be more likely to have watched a children's preschool show about science than know who Cardi B is. But I was like the most flattering thing ever. I was like, I love you kids so much. You've made me feel so cool.
That is awesome. What a validating moment. That's
so cool. That gives me so much hope.
Yeah.
For the young preschoolers coming up right now.
So I know that so we got a little bit of time left, and there's a couple questions. I'm sure that you've answered a lot of them, but I want to ask you them because we have, an expert on this show. This is on my outline, says aliens, SpaceX, and Mars. So the first question I have for you, what is your take on the upcoming Pentagon briefing on their UAP, unidentified aerial phenomenon, I believe, task force? I know that you've dispelled some rumors about there being evidence of aliens, but I kind of want to hear it from you.
I know. Well, we'll see when their report comes out. I'll be just as interested as anyone else to see their report on UAPs, otherwise known as UFOs. But I think what I like to remind people is that an unidentified flying object is just unidentified to you. It doesn't mean that it's not identifiable by somebody else. What is most likely the case is that, some of these vehicles could be a trick of the eye. It could be an optical illusion that happens all the time. Pilots often mistake the planet Venus in the sky as a UFO. That's one of the most commonly reported UFOs. And so not to say, not to trust these pilots, but there are things that happen that are a trick of the eye that they could be forgiven for mistaking. They could also be aerial vehicles from another country. And, that's not as exciting as aliens, but just as concerning that we would want to
Yeah.
do a little bit more research on. But in my world, anytime we say, oh, it must be aliens, it's a very lazy explanation because there are so many other interesting answers if you dig for them and if you do the analysis. Just kind of throwing the blanket term, oh, aliens, it's too easy. You could say aliens for anything. But if you ask the question and you follow the thread and you do a little bit more research, there's usually a more terrestrial explanation.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's usually a catch-all and like you said, a lazy explanation for something that's a lot more complex and multifaceted. So I completely agree with you. I am interested in seeing what they do. I'm kind of looking forward to the first official congressional hearing on unidentified flying
I
objects.
know, me too.
And watching them try to navigate that will be interesting. So, and I don't know what your opinion is on this. I'm interested in hearing it. Do you think that the private spaceflight companies like SpaceX and I think Blue Origin is one of the other ones, how do you think they help or hurt the overall goal of exploring space?
Interesting. So private companies have always been involved in space exploration. Something upwards of 80% of NASA's budget has always gone to private companies. So, like when we went to the moon, it wasn't just like NASA, it was Boeing and IBM and a lot of other companies. And so now it's a little bit more recognizable because they have these eccentric billionaires at the helm. And so we feel like it's more private. And it is to a certain extent, but what has happened is that NASA is in the business of pushing the envelope of what is possible. And before, the envelope was low Earth orbit, where the International Space Station is, basically just barely in space, just barely orbiting our Earth right above us. But now we've been doing that for many decades, and we feel as if we know how to do that. So what's happened is NASA has kind of passed the keys to low Earth orbit to SpaceX and Boeing and some of these other companies. NASA is still doing a lot of oversight of that. It's not just SpaceX doing it on its own. NASA is still having the oversight of all of that. But now, because they're allowing SpaceX and Blue Origin and some of the others to take over that, they're focusing on what's never been done before. They're back in the business of pushing the envelope of what's never been done before. And so I think it's wonderful that these private companies are doing this work because now they can make it more efficient. They can innovate faster. They can make it cheaper. They can do all the things that private companies are better at doing than the government. And NASA can kind of focus its resources on pushing the envelope of like going to the moon and maybe going to Mars.
That's super interesting. That's I think a really great way of framing it where, government can lay the foundation and private companies can make it better or expedite it or make it cheaper or make it more accessible to people. That's a really good way of framing that.
Yeah. And yeah.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, and I'm not to say that there's not criticism that is warranted, because I think, especially with Musk, there's a lot of things that he does that are questionable at best. And so, there's a lot of criticism to be had on the people who are running these companies. But in general, that's just kind of the layout of how that happened. But for example, I think a lot of people have a concern of like, well, Musk is going to be running space by himself. SpaceX would not exist without NASA. So he cannot do a lot of these things without NASA's support, without the government support. And that is not likely to change in the future. It's very expensive to get to space, even for a billionaire. And so, and there's a lot of federal oversight on what goes to space. Everything has to get approved. A private billionaire can't just say like, I want to send a bomb to space because I think that sounds fun. Like nope, you can't do that. And so I think that a lot of the concerns that people have are because perhaps they don't understand a lot of the oversight that currently exists, at least in the United States.
Yeah, that's a good point, and thank God for government regulations preventing Elon Musk from bombing space, because I would not put that past him
Yeah, yeah.
at all. My last question, then I'll turn it over to John, because I know he has a really great last one, is, in your opinion, and this is probably purely speculative, but in your opinion, do you think in our lifetime we will see a successful manned mission to Mars?
Ooh, yes, I definitely think we'll see, boots on Mars for sure. Um, I, it'll be interesting to see how that happens because it will be pretty expensive. The joke is always that, Mars is perpetually 10 years away because we could always get there within 10 years if we invested the time and money and energy into it. The problem is that 10 years is longer than any administration is going to be in office. And so when you have a change in administration, oftentimes that also means a change in a location of where NASA is going to go, because that next president wants their own goal. And so with Bush, we were going to the moon. With Obama, we were going to Mars. With Trump, we were going back to the moon. And now with Biden, we're still sticking with the moon because I think everybody is like, can we just choose where we're going to go and focus those resources? And I've always been a moon person myself. I think that that's better for the economy for many reasons, mostly because that's more accessible to private companies here. Mars is just much harder to get to. But anyways, Mars is still going to be probably 15, 20 years away, in my opinion, but I think we'll get there.
Yeah. You make a great point about the political barriers of that too. And I think, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but if I remember correctly, like one of the reasons why we were able to make it to the moon in the first place is because of the tension between the United States and the Soviet Union. And there's a lot of egos there too. They were just in political power. But yeah, I think that's really interesting. And I hope that we do see that day, because God, I can't imagine how powerful that would be to just sit in front of the TV and be able to watch that happen in front of you.
I know. I'm very jealous of the generation that had that Apollo moment, because that is like just so cool to imagine. I'll be excited with NASA's Artemis program. The program that is currently underway is they're going to send the first woman to the moon. And so Artemis in Greek mythology is Apollo's twin sister. And so this is the kind of the follow on to Apollo. And the difference here is that they are intending to go to the moon to stay. They're not just going to go there, grab some rocks and come home. It's intended to be a bit more sustainable. And so they can do more science, more research, and kind of learn all of the things we need to learn to be able to expand the human presence into space and live on a place like the moon.
Interesting. I didn't know that. That's super interesting.
Cool. Mm-hmm. All right. So we've gotten the appetizers out of the way. The entree is here. The big one. This is the big one. Okay. So, and I know this is going to mean a lot to you. So what's your theory on Mothman? Is it real?
My gosh.
Is it fake? Is it something else? So we've done an entire series on Mothman and how everybody kind of has random
most
stuff.
Controversial question we've asked.
It is the most controversial question. But we want to get your take, because maybe you have some scientific phenomenon that could explain Mothman.
No, I don't have any theories on Mothman. And now I'm really disappointed in myself that I don't have any theories on Mothman, because what does that say about me as a West Virginian? Because I remember hearing about Mothman growing up and just being like, oh, that's just like a goofy, like it's kind of like Bigfoot, but in West Virginia. And I never really learned that much about it. So honestly, I don't know much about Mothman, unfortunately. So I have no theories.
The prevailing explanation is that it was a barn owl.
Okay. It's kind of boring.
Like a red light and smell some weird stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. That's
aliens.
We hear barn owl and we're like, I don't know about that. Don't know about
Alien sounds more reasonable.
Right, exactly. Default.
Well,
when in doubt, go to aliens.
Look, you not having a theory on Mothman, I think, says one thing about you, and that's you have a lot of better stuff to be focusing on.
No. You know what I'm going to do after this is I'm going to research Mothman, and I am going to make my own theory.
Okay. All right.
Yes,
Well,
do it. Let us
we will
know about it.
we will update all of our listeners on that theory.
Okay, good.
100%. Well, Emily, thank you so much. This has been such a fun conversation, and it's been really a great pleasure of ours to have you on our show. You are such a great representative of the state of West Virginia, and we're excited to just see where you go from here.
Well, thank you. I'm a huge fan of all of you. Like, you guys are doing such great work yourself, and I love seeing you succeed on Twitter and elsewhere. And I am a huge fan and follower.
Well, thank you.